Hey there, welcome everyone. This video and potentially subsequent parts of this video are going to serve as me telling my story, my self-development, self-improvement, goal setting and goal achieving story. I want to start with my younger years. I'm not going to touch too much on my childhood and stuff like that. I want to focus mostly on late teenage years into early adulthood and beyond so I can get to the hardcore self-improvement years as quickly as possible. But it's important to talk about your earliest years of development, like becoming an adult, I think. And some of my biggest struggles in my life were in this period, and some of the things that still affect me in some ways today, although I moved on from a lot of them, happened in this period, as well as I guess what I'd call beginner newbie struggles. I think a lot of the less experienced guys struggle with, especially in the areas I'm going to talk about. The three big ones I've come up with of my late teenage years up until around 22 years old, and that's an important number. We're going to get to why I put 22 as the end date there. I've gone for social struggles, like a struggle to make friends, sexual hesitancy, which is all around learning how to date, losing your virginity, and then depression and emotional control. These things were all my biggest hurdles in my young adult years. I'll talk about social stuff first, because I think social, like my ability to socialize, and especially as a kid, as a teenager, your ability to socialize really can determine your enjoyment and happiness in that era. And I want this overall series to be about, men achieving happiness, men developing themselves to the point where they can achieve their goals and get what they want out of life. So if we're looking at me as like a young adult, a teenager, my social struggles were at the forefront of my mind pretty much all the time. And there's some, development early stage reasons for this. I was an only child. I was born on what was essentially an isolated farm. So not only did I not have any brothers or sisters, I didn't have any peer group, any kids around me for miles. I was not even in cycling distance of any of the friends I had at school. My school trip in the morning was like 15 minutes drive or something. So I couldn't personally get to the other kids when I was a young age. I had a couple of friends who were the sons of people who worked for my parents on the farm, and they would come over every like random days, and they were my best friends growing up because they were like the only kids I got to play with outside of school. And so a lot of my friends, they were like, meeting their neighbors. The other kids that they hung out with were like their neighbors, and they would just hang out with them and like go roller skating and biking on the weekends or whatever. I never got to do this. And when I was like 11, I was then sent off to boarding school, which is like, oh, like I'm going, like taking a kid who isn't really that socially developed and then throwing him into boarding school. So that was fun. At school, I wasn't really like bullied or outcast in any way, but I certainly wasn't like massively popular. I felt weird and odd compared to a lot of the other kids, but I feel like there were weirder kids than me, if that makes sense. So I wasn't a great target for bullying. I was also tall from a young age. I think I hit 6 foot at like 15. So it wasn't the case of, like one of those terrible bullying stories you've heard. Although boarding school was a bit of, there was a lot of fights. Like I was in a lot of fights up until about the age of 16. But then when I was 16, I left that school out of determination to have a better social life. And at boarding school, you're very sheltered. You can't go off school grounds and go drinking with your friends. Like a lot of my friends who didn't go to boarding school did. So at 16, I decided to leave and go to a state-run school where I'd have a lot more freedom. And with that freedom, the idea was that I would, be able to get into social groups that I wanted to get to, like have cool friends. I wanted to be cool and have cool friends. That if I was gonna overlook this entire time period all the way up till the end of my college years, I wanted to be cool and I wanted to have friends that valued me. There was nothing really else. Like obviously I wanted to date and in theory I wanted to sleep with girls and date, but mostly I wanted to be cool and accepted socially, where I felt like I never really had been, especially at boarding school. And at college, from here into up until the end of college, what I would describe this as was trying to be socially accepted and experiencing some bad rejections along the way. Case in point of this, I had a friend group at college that I felt like I was pretty close with a few of these guys. College in England is what we call the school before you go to college. I know it's confusing, but university is what we call college, and then college is where you are before you go to university. I don't know. I'm going to keep saying school just not confuse anything here. So at school, I made these friends that I thought I was pretty good with. But then in England, there's like a thing where everyone goes on a holiday at the end of the school, and like it's when you're like 18 and you can drink and go off on your own. And I wasn't invited to any of these like lads' holidays they went on at the end of school years. And this was like a big social occasion, like a big rite of passage for a lot of young English lads. And I was not included. I was not part of it. To some degree, looking back, I did always feel a bit out of place in that friend group. I felt like they weren't fully including me and like respecting me in the way they respected the other guys in that group. So yeah, I get where that was coming from. It was still very like gutting that like when I found out about this and when I found out that I wasn't going to be going with them and stuff, and like I just been sitting with them at lunch for like 2 years and they didn't like respect me or value me. So yeah, that was fucking like galling, you know? And moving on into college or university, it was like, oh, and now I can have a fresh start and try this again. Like that was the good part about being young, is you get loads of fresh starts. You can just kind of keep moving and keep getting fresh starts. Like you go from one school to another, then you go to college, you get a fresh start at college. So I went to college once again, trying to make friends, trying to be cool. I had to live in a flat with a bunch of guys I didn't know before I got there. That's pretty typical at university. You end up living in accommodation that the university assigns for you in first year, and you typically make friends with the people that you are put with. And that was good because I didn't really know how to make friends properly. So my only real avenue for making friends were like people on my courses and the people that I lived with. So, you know, I tried to make friends with the guys that I live with. At this time, I was experiencing pretty obvious depression looking back, although I didn't really label it that way. I put depression and anxiety and emotional control in one of the main parts of this section. Yeah, that made me pretty horrible to live with. Obviously, when you're going through depression, it's like not necessarily your fault. But if you don't do anything to like, you know, solve it, if you lash out at people, if you don't have good emotional control as well, it does become your fault if you don't do anything about it and you don't do anything to stop it. Anyway, I'd become so unpleasant to live with that when the topic of where are we going to move next year, are we going to live in a house together, their response to this, like the boys I live with, was to call a house meeting, and they wrote me a letter saying they didn't want to live with me next year. And this had come off the back of me just like having serious anger issues, like getting into really big arguments with them. I didn't get into physical fights, but borderline, we nearly got into physical fights with the guys I was living with. And yeah, they just took the decision that I wasn't, you know, worth the effort to make a house with in the second year. That was my worst social moment. The only friends or even just people I hung out with socially at college completely just rejecting me flat out. And they were, you know, it's pretty awkward after that. And the night that happened, like I pretty much called my cousin, who was like my de facto brother when I was younger. Like he like looked out for me, and I was just like crying down the phone, like at just like being rejected so thoroughly socially, having experienced the previous rejection at my last school from the guys who I thought were my friends, and then having another situation where the guys I thought were like the closest thing I had to friends at college, just, you know, reaching the point where they wrote me a letter saying they didn't want to know me, basically. So yeah, this was the low point. I'll talk about the other stuff quickly as well before I get into like how I fixed it in this era. So sexual hesitancy was another big one. I think this kind of moved over to this idea that I was a loser, that I was socially rejected, was that I was also like getting nowhere with girls. But a lot of it was, it's hard to really put this into words properly. Like, it's not that there wasn't like female interest. It's not that there wasn't potential opportunity. I definitely didn't know how the hell to like meet a girl and then have sex and like to have date and have sex. I didn't know any of the steps. I didn't know what I was doing. I was also too fucking scared to figure it out. Like I was scared to escalate, mostly for fear of doing things wrong, of being viewed as inexperienced. I was probably not emotionally mature enough to handle even like a basic sexual relationship from the age of, I'm going to say from the age of like my teenage years all the way up to like 21. Like I was very, very sexually hesitant. Like there were points at college where girls, like, if you're in a club, girls get drunk, they start actually, making moves on guys. Happened to me a couple of times. Both times I basically ran away from the situation. Like I remember two occasions specifically. One where a girl like put her arms around me and I basically went like hand off and like ran to the toilet to get away. And then another one was a girl off my course who pretty clearly had the eyes for me, and I would see her out like club nights occasionally on in the city that we were in. In England, obviously the drinking age is like 18, so we were all going to clubs. As soon as you get to university, you went on club nights. And then like the last night of like the year, she like full on once again had her arms around me in the club, and like I just didn't do anything. Like I just kind of stood there like talking to her, like, and she just basically she was like, "What the fuck? Why aren't you making out with me?" And like I just didn't progress it because I was too scared of making mistakes. I was scared. Like the best way I can describe it is like sexual hesitancy. Like I just didn't have that drive and desire in me that like a lot of my friends or the guys I knew had. Like I knew guys that were getting laid at like 15 and like 16. Like that was really common. That's like the common age a lot of guys I knew lost their virginity. A lot of them lost it like at house parties. Guys who were getting like, when they're 15 years old, getting blowjobs at school and stuff like that. Just some guys just had this like in their minds. And I feel like as someone who didn't have it, I felt fucking weird. I felt unnatural, like a loser, complete social weirdo. I felt like that meant there was something missing between me and girls when I talked to them socially. There was a lot of like personal shame and feeling like a loser that I had for this. I tried to hide the fact I was still a virgin from all of my college friends and my school friends. It felt like I was living this lie because like I was too ashamed to admit that I was inexperienced, but at the same time, like, I had to pretend, or like it's not like I could pretend I was getting laid all the time. I didn't lie about that. But like at the same time, I just, I made up stories about having got laid before and like, yeah, just avoided the topic. So that overshadowed a lot of my social events, like feeling like a loser because I was still a virgin. And I lost my virginity at 22. That's why this is up till 22, because that's like the last thing I achieved in this kind of era of trying to normalize myself socially and sexually, I guess. And then, depression, anxiety, and emotional control. I had no real framework for understanding this was happening to me, or how to get out of it, or how to solve it. Like I just didn't have any idea of where do you go when you lose all motivation, you lose all sense of excitement in your life, you just don't have purpose to move forward. And then the emotional control, like I didn't have any stoicism, I didn't have any ability to control my anger. I just felt emotions and lashed out, and that was the big reason behind me being unable, just being unpleasant to live with in first year. So that was the bad part. That was when I was 19. So 2 more years left in this story. So socially, I did a hell of a lot better in my second year of college. I made a really fast decision after my roommates basically said they didn't want to live with me anymore. And I got myself accommodation in halls again in the second year of uni. And from there, I basically made friends with first years who were coming in to move into accommodation. So I basically decided to reset and have another go at first year. And I made the best friends I had made to date at that point. Like guys who never really, the best thing about those friends is that they didn't like, just like mock me in like a mean way, or like our banter wasn't like in that kind of mean, putting people down kind of way that I'd only really experienced before, like with my school friends and then my first year friends. We like genuinely supported and like wanted each other to be happy and succeed with our lives and like have a good time together. And then I still wasn't able to be honest with them about my virginity and all that stuff though, and my like just like fear of women and like doing anything. But they went out with me all the time. We went out to club nights. We went out, like they accepted me for whatever, like socially. And I felt pretty cool being friends with these guys, which is really what I wanted. Like I wanted cool friends. I wanted friends that other people found, they were popular with other people, which meant that you were popular. I used to think that I think that the overall drive to make popular friends and cool friends was that I would get invited to parties, and that's where I'd fix the sexual stuff. That's where I'd fix the gap between me and women. It didn't really work out, but at this point I did start to become the party guy that I would eventually become. This is like the seeds of me going out. And this is also where I discovered my love of house techno and like rave nights. Like one of my friends in this group introduced me to that scene, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. And, you know, dragging me into what eventually would be like my calling for nights out. Regarding depression, anxiety, and emotional control, I still didn't get a grip on this, I don't think, that well at this point, but this is the last part of my life where I had like the worst depression. I think going through it and coming out the other side, even if I didn't build a lot of structures around like that I have now, like I have crisis structures now, I have like basically a response planned out if I start to feel that way. But going through this for the first real time in a really bad way was a big moment for me. And I definitely learned more emotional control, especially in social situations, through becoming friends with these guys in second year. And finally, sexual hesitancy and losing virginity. So this takes a little bit longer. This just doesn't, like, I'm just not a natural, I don't think, in that regard. At least my development I'm a late bloomer. And eventually I lost it almost by accident. Like, it was a girl that, one of the girls I like passed up at uni accidentally. And I didn't pass her up in like the ways I said where I ran away from her in a club. She actually slept with me in my bed in my second year of university. And I didn't do anything with her. She was very drunk. We were both very drunk actually. And so it was like, I think she said to me like, do you want to do anything? And I was like, yo, we're both shit-faced. This is a bad idea. I didn't say, my concern was actually more that, you know, I was a virgin, didn't know what the fuck I was doing. But also, yeah, we were both utterly shit-faced. And she started, like 10 minutes after she said, do you want to do something? She started like throwing up in my toilet. So it was a pretty good call not to like do anything in that situation. But a couple of years later, we started talking on Skype, and she was from Canada. She'd only been over in England at the university for like, you know, a foreign exchange placement. But she was going to come and visit London where I had moved. And she decided she wanted to come and stay with me and see me again. And obviously that meant about a day later, she was like, by the way, I like you, over Skype. So I was like, okay, yeah, you can come see me. You come stay with me. And obviously we stayed in the same bed. And yeah, one thing led to another. And she basically like rolled over, got on top of me, and we started having sex. That's how I ended up losing my virginity at 22, because a girl basically forced herself into that situation. So I didn't really go out there and like force myself to lose it. It sort of just happened. But I guess the growth there and the movement there was me actually allowing it to happen for once, given that in previous situations with the same girl, I had not pushed for it. I had not allowed it to happen. But this time I didn't get in my own way. I was still fucking scared for like, I don't know. I was the sexually hesitant guy who didn't know how to escalate physically, didn't know how to have sex, didn't really know how to make out properly. That's how like how far my growth back, that's how little growth I had in terms of physical interaction with girls. At 22 years old, I didn't really know how to make out properly. Yeah, I still feel like a bit of shame when I talk about it, when I look back, and it shouldn't necessarily be there. I think sexual hesitancy is something that a lot of guys don't really talk about that went through it, because they lose their virginity, they gain the experience, they move forward. But it's definitely affecting more men than we realize potentially. Like you see with guys who are still virgins into their 20s, moving on to like guys. I heard a podcast the other day where some guy admitted he was a virgin to this guy, and he'd lost his virginity at 49. I'm assuming there was religious reasons or something behind that, but that's pretty crazy. When looking at goals and results for this early phase, I want to emphasize this is a structure that I've assigned looking back on it. Throughout this time, I didn't understand self-improvement. I didn't know how to set goals. I didn't know how to break them down into smaller goals, figure out the input for the outputs that I wanted. I was freewheeling it through life, sort of knowing what I needed and wanted to work on. Social life was what I put the most priority and effort into and had the most success in because of it. But with sex life development, that was, as you've heard, passively achieved in the end, and it took a long time just to get to losing my virginity at 22. Depression and anxiety and emotional control, I sort of got through this. I hadn't figured out how to really crush it yet at this point. That's why I didn't talk too much about it. But these are the things I started working on really hard in later phases to like properly crush. But from this period, they were mostly just reduced to a level that I could survive and get forward with my life. Overall, this was self-development in the early phase, achieved without a coherent plan, and definitely not the most targeted action taken towards everything throughout. But we got somewhere. I got the results that I got in this early phase. So with all of that development, we've reached me at 22, and I am in London at this point. I've left university. I got my job basically immediately out of college. So essentially, I had done everything the normie life says you're meant to do. I'd got my degree. I'd finally lost my virginity. I actually moved on after that with a different girl and started seeing her in more of a long-term relationship. I had friends. I had made a good group of friends I was still in touch with from university. I was now able to make better friends. I was better at making friends. I was able to spot friends that actually valued me and weren't just putting up with me. There was some good strides made. I was definitely a lot more put together mentally. I felt like I could handle myself a lot better. Ready for what a career-focused life in London had in store for me. It sucked. It fucking sucked. I fucking hated that. I hated the corporate job in London. I hated living in a city that was just designed to sap all the money and time and energy out of you and leave you with very little in return. I fell off when it came to making more friends. I didn't build the social group I wanted in London. That was not a fun phase of my life looking back. The 3 years I spent in London after college. College was a lot more fun than the first couple of years at work. So let's delve into what the problems were here and what I did to fix them and move off to a much more exciting, fun life that I'm living now.